guess it just, there feels like there's no wiggle room. And not that there needs to be per se, but it does keep a lot of people out.
You bet.
I don't know how do you reconcile that?
You bet. That's a great question. And it's an honor talking with you. Your thoughtfulness, you're amazing. So thank you very much. Do I ever question my beliefs? Ma'am, I have no choice. I have to question my beliefs. I'm a thinking human being. I am convinced that if anybody never questions what they believe.
Cliff, I have a question about whether or not there's a point for non-believers to follow Christian rules. So Christians, in my understanding, is that there's nothing that they can do to atone for their own sins. There's no amount of not sinning that they can do that will put them in better standing with God, that only faith in Jesus does that. But if a non-believer does not put their faith in Jesus, what is the point of them following the law? Like, for example, homosexuality. Why should non-Christians impose that if they believe it's a sin? Why should they impose that on non-believers to not follow that? Because would it not matter at all if they did or didn't? They did not have faith in Christ, so they would end up going to hell, regardless of whether or not they sinned. So my question really, is there a point for non-believers to do their best to not sin? Or should Christians play a part in that? Should they try and get non-believers to not sin?
Okay, fascinating question. All of my atheist friends are very good people. Why? All of my atheist friends have consciences and they have rational minds. By using the human conscience, you have this innate moral indicator to help you distinguish between right and wrong, justice and injustice, good and evil. And every single one of my atheist friends uses their consciences in what I would call a very responsible way. But here's the problem. My atheist friends who exercise their consciences in very responsible ways have to acknowledge that if they were to choose the opposite behavior of whatever they chose, it would be equally valid. Why? Because morality is relative. Because there is no God, there is no standard outside of the human mind to define right and wrong. Oh no, someone says, there's culture. Fine. There is culture. So if you're going to posit that culture defines right and wrong, which culture should it be? The culture of the KKK? The culture of Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany? The culture of the U.S. Supreme Court at the time of the Dred Scott decision when it determined that black folks are 3/5 the value of white folks? Which culture are you talking about? The culture of Eskimos that put their babies out to freeze to death? The culture here in the United States where we slaughter millions of babies through abortion? Which culture are you trusting to define right and wrong? My point is, when you're an atheist, if you're going to be intellectually honest and consistent, you're going to have to acknowledge that morality is relative, which means you can create your own system of morality, but you cannot adopt the position that says, my system of morality is correct, and those who contradict me are incorrect, because it's all relative. It's very similar to, Cliff, do you prefer broccoli or asparagus? And my point is, well, I really don't care. It's just a prejudice. Now, when it comes to morality, I'm convinced it's not an issue of prejudice. It's an issue of using your conscience to understand what is objectively true. And it's not just a taste, whether you abuse an innocent child or don't abuse an innocent child. But if you're an atheist, what you're going to have to acknowledge is the choice to not abuse an innocent child, that's my choice. But if I were to choose the opposite and choose to abuse an innocent child, that's equally valid, because it's all relative.
So do you think that Christians who do believe in an objective morality have the right to impose that objective morality on someone who believes in a subjective or relative morality?
Great question. We live in a democracy, which means we vote, we decide. You've raised a very hard question, which is, what laws are we going to support? Laws that will force people to behave a certain way? And what ethical areas will we not pass a law on and leave it simply up to the decision of the individual? Now, I hope that you would agree with me that equal housing opportunity is something we should pass a law on and enforce. When you're going to rent your apartment, if you are not going to rent it to a person because of their ethnic heritage, because of their race, that is illegal. Second law, no sexual discrimination in the marketplace, in the workplace. I hope you and I are both going to support that law. You're not allowed to discriminate against a woman or against a man. You're to respect them as of equal value and not discriminate against them in the marketplace. Those are examples of laws that I think the majority of us can agree on. Now, the difficult question becomes on an issue like abortion. Are we going to pass a law that says abortion is allowable, or are we going to pass a law that says abortion is not allowable? If abortion is simply removing excess skin from a woman's body, no, we're not going to pass a law against removing excess skin. I remove excess skin from my body. We all do every week. We cut our fingernails and toenails. We cut our hair. We're not going to pass a law that says you're not allowed to remove excess skin from your body. But if that little life in a woman's womb is a human life, not an alligator, not a pig, not a chicken, if it's a human life, then I would understand why an atheist and a theist, a Christian, would seek to pass a law that would stand against terminating a human life. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think more of my question was along the lines of whether or not a Christian should ever try and encourage a non-Christian to not sin if there's no point in them not doing that without faith in Christ. So should a Christian ever tell a non-Christian to not go drink or to not have homosexual relationships if they don't have faith in Christ at all? Because would there be a point to that? And if so, why do Christians do that in government? Like, why do they impose their laws on non-Christians if there's no point in terms of sin?
Okay, my atheist friends will support laws against sexual discrimination. My atheist friends will support laws against racism because they have consciences and rational minds that inform them that sexual discrimination and racism are absolutely wrong. Therefore, they will get behind laws along with me to outlaw sexual discrimination and racism.
But isn't that only because their subjective point of view agrees with your objective point of view?
Correct.
But in terms of where y'all disagree, where their subjective point of view disagrees with your objective point of view, why is it that your beliefs should impose upon theirs if your belief says that it does not matter what they do because they do not have faith in Christ. Therefore, they are sinners and nothing more.
Oh, no. There is no atheist who's just a sinner and nothing more. Atheists are valuable human beings because they're created in the image of God, from my faith perspective. Therefore, I'm going to respect every atheist. I'm going to respect every agnostic. I'm going to respect every human being who is either heterosexual, homosexual, or is into having sex with animals. I still respect a human being, even though I disagree with them. Why do I respect them? Because I'm convinced that human value is not based on lifestyle. Human value comes from the fact that God created you in His image, and God don't make junk. So therefore, I'm going to respect every single human being. I have no option as a follower of Christ. Now, when it comes to, though, this issue of imposing your laws, friends, we live in a democracy, which means there are going to be laws that are put together, and we're going to vote, and we're going to decide. And guess what? If you lose the vote, whoever you did not vote for, but who won, is going to be president, and whatever the Supreme Court decides, that's the law of the land. And to go sucking your thumb saying, oh gosh, everybody's imposing these laws on me, is a little bit of a crybaby attitude. No, we are a democracy. That's the form of government we have here. If you don't like it, I'm sure you can immigrate to another country. Go to Canada or Mexico or wherever you want to go. But that's the form of government that we have here in the United States. So when I lose in the voting box, in the voting booth, I can't go suck my thumb and complain and whine about it. That's the type of government that we have. Now, I better also get off my backside and be involved in the political process and seek to change what I view as wrong. And that is the position of a follower of Christ. Now, let me give you one quick example. In this culture that we live in, we are totally misdefining freedom. Many of us. Not all of us, but many of us. What I mean is this. I, as an American, celebrate freedom. Freedom is based on the biblical concept that all human beings have value because we all are created in the image of God. We all have a rational mind, and we're to exercise that rational mind. We all have a conscience, and we're to exercise that conscience. Freedom does not mean if you tell me that something's wrong, you are depriving me of freedom. Baloney. If you have an opinion that something is wrong that I do, and you tell me, Cliff, you're doing something wrong, we then will have a dialogue in this culture and disagree. But the idea that freedom means I can do anything and nobody is allowed to contradict me is trash. Trash thinking. 60-year-old guy loves to eat junk food. 60-year-old guy loves to play with his grandchildren. Yesterday, 60-year-old guy went to a doctor for a physical, and his doctor told him, if you continue to eat the junk food you're eating, you will have a massive heart attack fairly soon. Now 60-year-old guy has to make a decision. Do I want to keep on eating the junk food and have a heart attack, or do I want to give up eating junk food in order that I can play with my grandchildren? If that 60-year-old guy says, oh, the doctor is being mean. He's being like a dictator. He's imposing things on me. That 60-year-old guy is out to lunch. The doctor has analyzed the truth. The truth is, sir, your arteries are getting clogged. And if that pattern continues, you're going to have a massive heart attack. Now you've got to make a decision. Here's reality. And freedom is not saying, I can eat all the junk food I want, and I can play with my grandchildren for the next 20 years. No, sir, you have to make a decision.
Okay. So in that metaphor, the Christian would be the doctor who is telling society that these sinful actions are going to destroy them. Is that correct?
As is the atheist who says these decisions are going to lead to horrible consequences.
Okay. So where does the credibility for the Christian way of life come from then? The fact that a doctor has to go through training in medical school, where was the credibility come from a Christian?
Great question. Followers of Christ over the past 2,000 years have been at the forefront of thinking. Thinking. Who's the father of modern astronomy?
Galileo, maybe?
No. Kepler, thank you. Johann Kepler, the father of modern astronomy, as he's looking out at the stars at night, exclaims, "O God, I am thinking your thoughts after you." Galileo, tremendous scientist. The church persecuted him. But Galileo, after the church persecuted him, said, quote, "The Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go." Francis Collins was head of the Human Genome Project, and now he's with the NIH. Francis Collins is a deeply committed follower of Christ. And in the 1600s, when Harvard College was started, the trustees of Harvard College wrote, quote, "Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well that the main end of his life is to know God and Jesus Christ, and to put Christ in the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning." Harvard trustees, late 1600s, wrote that. You see, when you begin to understand your rational mind is not simply a highly developed monkey's brain. Instead, your rational mind is a gift from the explosive creator who created the cosmos. You begin to understand I am responsible to think and to work hard through logic and reason using those gifts that God has given me.
Okay. So you were talking about the credibility that comes from intelligent Christians, but is that really where Christianity gets their credibility? Because atheists are extremely intelligent as well. Other religions have intelligent people, but does the credibility not come from something else besides that? Because if it doesn't, then why is that more credible than another way of life?
Well, the credibility of Christianity is based on the credibility of Jesus Christ. And when you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will be confronted by the historical evidence that Jesus Christ is credible. What is that evidence? It's the historical evidence of what he taught. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, you are confronted by the teachings of an ethical genius. Don't take it from me. Robert Coles, retired from Harvard as a professor in sociology and psychology, wrote, all the writings on ethics over the past 2,000 years are simply footnotes to the Sermon on the Mount. You read the Sermon on the Mount and you are confronted by ethical genius. Secondly, in the Gospels you read about how Jesus lived, how he treated people, and it demands respect. It's credible. Thirdly, in the Gospels you read how he died, nailed to a wooden crossbeam. Instead of cursing his enemies, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Amazing. Amazing behavior under excruciating pressure. But fourthly, and most importantly, 3 days after he dies, he rises from the dead. And over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him risen from the dead. So the evidence is you can trust Jesus. He is credible. So that is the foundation for faith in Christ, the credibility of Christ.
Okay, so Christ is credible because of the life and resurrection, and so we should model him. Is that what you're saying, because of his life and resurrection?
We should put our faith in him and then seek to obey him.
Okay, so if another credible person existed that modeled a life slightly different, why should we not model that person instead? If they had an equally, or not equally good life, but both a successful life, they both had good morals, but may disagree on something, which one should we follow? Because why is Christ more credible simply because of his life versus another person that would be a good person but might disagree with Christ on something? Why would we choose that credibility versus a different one?
You bet. Great question. If you find somebody who is more credible than Christ, you should trust that person more than Christ. But remember, in John chapter 8, Jesus could look into the faces of his enemies and ask them, which one of you can prove me guilty of sin? His enemies were silent. In 1 John chapter 3, John, who lived intimately with Christ for 3 years, could write about him, in him is no sin. In other words, he lived a morally perfect life.
But isn't the sin based on what God, who is Christ, has said is sin? So he would say, what is sin? Therefore, he would, or I guess he would define what is sin. So obviously he would not sin. And so how is that different than a person who could claim that this is the standard of what is sin and what is not, and I don't do this? How is that different than what Christ did?
Well, in one sense, it's not different. But I would argue, when you read the Sermon on the Mount, if you can't pick up a ring of truth, if there is not something deep within you that responds with, aha, then something's broken inside of you. And you can turn to me and say, no, Cliff, something's broken inside of you. When you read the Sermon on the Mount and say, aha, it shows that you are just blind. All right, fine. Then please show me an ethical system that contradicts Christ that is more reliable. And I have never been confronted by that. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is not the teachings of a madman. It has the ring of truth about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for raising all those excellent issues. Greatly appreciated. Somebody else have an issue they want to raise? Hold dogmatically to a truth. And the truth that they hold dogmatically to is all paths lead to heaven. Okay? Now, Muhammad, Jesus Christ, and Moses contradict that dogmatic position. Moses, Muhammad, and Jesus Christ insist there is one true living God. There are not many gods. And then Moses, Muhammad, and Jesus disagree about the way to God. Although Jesus and Moses really didn't disagree, but Jesus adds to what Moses was teaching. Man, my point is, if I say to you that 2 + 2 = 4, not 3 and not 5, I am making a dogmatic truth claim. 2 + 2 = 4. That is called reality. Contradictory ideas cannot both be equally true in the same way at the same time. It's the law of non-contradiction. So, if what you say is true, that every path leads to heaven, then that's a truth claim, right? And if somebody else says 10 paths lead to heaven, that's a truth claim, Not every path leads to it, only 10. And if someone else, like Jesus Christ, says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me, that's a truth claim. All these truth claims contradict each other, so they can't all be right. They're either all wrong or one of them's right. Now, the reason that I trust Jesus Christ to speak the truth is because the evidence of the way he lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead points to his credibility. So that's why I trust him to be the way, the truth, and the life.
Do you ever contemplate that you could be wrong? And like, I mean, because I guess there feels like there's no wiggle room. And not that there needs to be per se, but it does keep a lot of people out.
You bet.
I don't know how do you reconcile that?
You bet. That's a great question. And it's an honor talking with you. Your thoughtfulness, you're amazing. So thank you very much. Do I ever question my beliefs? Ma'am, I have no choice. I have to question my beliefs. I'm a thinking human being. I am convinced that if anybody never questions what they believe, they're basically on the way to being brain dead. So you always have to question what you believe. You always have to ask yourself, gosh, is this right? Is this wrong? In fact, Jesus commands us to do that. In Matthew 7:1, Jesus says, judge not, lest ye be judged. He's not talking about suspending your critical thinking. Because 14 verses later in Matthew 7:15, he says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, inwardly they're ferocious wolves, and they will eat your lunch. In other words, good and evil are so intertwined in this world that if you don't consistently analyze and think, you're going to get ripped off. My experience is, he's absolutely right. I will get ripped off by a con artist, a charlatan, a liar, a hypocrite. And so will you. So that's why you better think critically and be skeptical. But you better not be cynical, because a cynic can't trust anybody or anything, because they've been burned so badly. And guess what that leads to? That leads to a life of total loneliness and isolation. I can't trust anybody, because they've hurt me. People have hurt me, so I can't trust anybody here, because they've hurt me. No, don't do that. You've got to learn to trust, but you've got to be skeptical and not trust the wrong person. Otherwise, you will get hurt big time. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I guess it's just but have there been times in your life where you found something that does contradict something? Like, what do you do when you find a contradiction? Because, like, I mean, yes, you have to think critically, but, like, that, I mean, you make it sound like you're still coming to the same conclusion, but what if you come to a different conclusion? Or, like, how do you, I don't know if I'm phrasing it right, but, like, there have to be moments in your life where things really do challenge your Christian faith.
Yes.
And challenge those things.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that and, like, let yourself, I don't know, how do you reconcile that besides just critically thinking? But, like,
You
is
bet.
it just having to kind of go into yourself and really, like, find what you believe? And if it
Right.
does conflict with the Christian faith, is that okay? Or is that, you know, because I feel like based on what you say, I feel like the assumption is that, yes, you critically think, but this is still ultimately where you're going to end up, because this is still ultimately the truth. And I think that, what if that isn't the case? I feel like you have these two extremes, and I don't necessarily agree that there are necessarily these two extremes. I think that they are two extremes, but I don't know, I think there are things that fall in the middle, or at least there are people who fall in the middle. And you can disagree with that, but
I respect your right to say that, but I think you just were pretty insensitive to me. I don't think I would have ever called you on that. Why? Ma'am, my environment that I grew up in gave me the two options: faith in Christ, atheism. So that's why when I'm sitting next to the casket of my niece, because those were the two major options I had in my environment, God exists, God doesn't exist, God is Jesus, or there is no God, that's what I'm struggling through, existentially.
right.
Now, when somebody else from a Buddhist tradition or a Hindu tradition or a Muslim tradition comes to me and says, Cliff, here's a better option than Christ, I have to be open and say, okay, fine, tell me about it. And so after the funeral, weeks after, months after, because I speak on university campuses semi-regularly, I had those other options put before me. And so my question for my Buddhist friend is, what is your solution to my niece being killed in an automobile accident? And when you read the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the solution is very simple. Cut off your desires. Detach. I'm sorry. I find that to be hardening of my heart. I am not going to detach from the suffering in this world. Why? Because I am convinced that is dehumanizing if I just detach. I am convinced there is real good, real evil. That's my experience, my observation. So that's why I cannot follow Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. I have great respect for the man. The way he turned his back on materialism and lived the life of an ascetic, I applaud. But the solution for suffering, to detach, to cut off my desires, I mean, I can't believe anybody would, I understand experientially why someone might do that. I'm just going to detach so I don't get hurt so badly. But my point is, gosh, that's dehumanizing.
Okay, and I hear that. So, yeah, and I didn't mean to be judgmental. It was more just that's the thought. But I understand that would be a difficult thing to go through, so I'm sorry.
No problem, ma'am. And you know something? I know you didn't mean anything by it, okay? But I think that you've been influenced by some people who are not willing to grapple with the exclusivity of all truth claims. You see, like it or not, ma'am, if I stand back and say, all paths lead to heaven, that is an exclusive claim. It's a truth claim. Do you know what it's claiming? It's claiming that the majority of human beings on the planet are wrong. Because the majority of human beings on the planet are either Muslim or Christian. And they don't believe that all paths lead to heaven. Now, I got no problem with that, but I'm trying to point out to you, ma'am, that I think you've been influenced. I don't know this, obviously, because I've never talked with you in depth. But due to what you've got there on your shirt and your line of thinking, just watch out for those folks. You'll find them in many Christian churches who say, all paths lead to heaven because God is love. Well, that is a really incredible truth claim. That's amazingly exclusive, because it's saying the majority of people on the planet are wrong.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, so much.
Have a good day.
You too. Have a great one.
I heard you talking a little bit about determinism.
Yes.
And you laid that down as just a truth that
Right.
we have free will. Right?
Yep.
And I want to maybe we can walk down together and look at, let's say if it's not, and just entertain this idea and then see where we get.
You bet.
So, so we know that what you're hearing right now, what you're seeing all
Yes.
around you, is really part of your consciousness, right? It's more accurate to say that all of you guys are inside my consciousness, and you're tweaking and pinching my nerves in my brain, as opposed to saying my consciousness is out here, right? And they've run tests which see that, and actually, let me back up a little. And whenever I hear you talk, it's arising from nothing, like that. And also, if you think about your own thoughts, right? Thoughts, they arise in your head, and you have no control over where they arise from. They just sort of pop up, appear. It's as foreign to me as your voices that just arises also within my consciousness.
Yep.
And they've run tests which can see that this electrical signaling that's happening in the brain happens moments before you know what's going on. For instance, if I have a button that says yes or no to a simple answer, arbitrary question, right? Then they'll know which button you're going to press before you know what button you're going to press.
Uh-huh.
And so now if we take that idea and sort of expand it outwards, right?
Yes.
And you're not responsible for what genes you're born in or
Right.
what environment you're in.
Right.
Those initial conditions were not your choice.
Right.
And when you're young, and if you take that the bottom idea, and then say that you don't choose your initial conditions, don't choose your environment, you can expand that through your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think free will is there's a possibility that it may be an illusion.
Yep.
And and so that's why I don't like you just putting it down as a truth claim.
You bet. I understand. I got no problem with it. Okay? So free will is an illusion. Not only is free will an illusion, but she might be an illusion. Right? All right? Yeah, she might be an illusion. So she might be an illusion, right? But right about now, I have to make a decision. And the decision I have to make is, does the evidence point to her being an illusion, or does the evidence point to her being there, and I better stop right there?
She's probably there. I mean,
Probably.
I agree.
Well, you can't prove it, right?
Yeah.
So it's possibly an illusion. My point to you is simple, sir. My point is, you can't live that way. You have to make decisions based on evidence. And the evidence is she is there, so my hand better stop right there. Because if I continue swinging, it's going to lead to pain, a breakdown in our friendship. It's going to be not good. So, let's not live in this la-la land of anything's possible. Yes, I am aware that anything is possible, and it's possible she's not here. I have to live my life based on evidence. And the same thing with free will. Believe it or not, sir, not everybody speaks to me as politely and respectfully as you have, and I appreciate it, okay? And when I'm confronted by a rascal, and there are a few rascals on this campus who come and speak here to me, I have to make a decision. And the decision I have to make is everything in me wants to basically embarrass the guy because he's so illogical and irrational. He's so emotionally biased against Christ. It's a joke. But I got to be careful that I don't do that. I have done it too often. And I have to make a decision to respect the guy, even though I think he's jerking me around, playing games with my head. And it's not an easy decision. So you see, sir, at times I've blown it, and I've been disrespectful and shredded a guy, and all other times I've been respectful. So my experience of life is, I don't have to respect you, and I don't have to disrespect you. I have a free will. That's my experience. Now, if your experience is different, so be it. But guess what? If you tell me you don't have a free will, and you whoop up on him, I'm going to grab you, and I'm going to say, guess what? You do have a free will, you abuse the free will in whooping up on him, and I'm holding you responsible. So that's why I believe there's a free will.
I agree that free will is really important in our society. Like, it's a deterrent, right? And
It's a deterrent?
what I mean is, it's important to have punishments for someone's actions and hold them accountable for their actions. So that, and if everyone had the notion that we don't have any free will, then you're right, it would be chaotic, it wouldn't work, right? A thing that bothers me about the notion of free will is how it applies to children, young adults versus adults.
Good.
For some reason, there's a gray line between when a kid becomes an adult. There's not a point where a kid becomes an adult, right? And for some reason, if a young child commits a crime, then they're not held to the same standard than an adult is.
Exactly.
But yet, but the thing is, you sort of say, oh, it wasn't their fault. They grew up this way, and it was their environment. It's like taking a step back from free will and saying, well, it's not really, they didn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think that we should take it with a healthy bit of it's important to believe in free will, but also to realize that there's a good chance that a lot of the things that we do in our life are determined by the initial conditions in our environment, and then so we have not as harsh punishments if I got angry and slapped someone.
Right.
An example for which is, do you guys remember, this is unfortunate, but the shooter on the pier, right?
Yep. You bet.
They found, he wrote a letter saying, I didn't know why I killed my wife. I don't know why I killed my kids.
Right.
Someone needs to look into my brain to see if anything's wrong with me. Right. And when they did, they found a tumor in a part of his brain which was related to self-control. And that's vindicating, isn't it? You sort of realize, well, he had a tumor, he couldn't help himself. And so he shouldn't be held as reliable, right?
Good.
But I posit that every action that I do, whether it might random urge to slap someone, right? It could also be just a tiny tumor in the brain which caused that electrical signal which made me do it. So healthy bit of thinking about free will may not be as free as we think, and also that people aren't they're totally not free agents, although they are to an extent. That's what I wanted to talk about. And also a funny note I wanted to say is it's weird, the atheist label. I don't understand the atheist label, because atheist is just not believing, right? And
atheism is saying there is no God.
Yeah, exactly. Not believing in a God, right?
There is no God.
Okay, atheism is that. But it's weird that you have to label yourself as something you're not. For instance, there are plenty of astronomers. I don't go around telling people that I'm a non-astronomer, right? That's everyone else who's not. So, like, the burden of truth lies upon the person who's religious.
Yes.
And being an atheist is just not being religious. So
I disagree. I am convinced that because God has left so much evidence of his existence, an atheist doesn't find God for the same reason that a criminal does not find the police. He's running away.
I feel like you're conflating ethics with religion.
The two are inextricably bound.
Okay, and I would like to say that that's not the case.
How can you scientifically prove an ethic?
Here, can I give you an example?
Please do.
So, in 16th century Europe, Christians, right? They found there was a custom where they would take cats in a net, and then they would hang them over a fire and slowly lower the cats into the fire, and they would scream, and then people would find enjoyment out of this. And now it's barbaric. Like, how could you do something like that? That's ethically totally unsound, right? But the thing is, they're still following the religious Christianity dogma of the time. And so I would like to say that ethics is a part coming from Christianity and other religions who have in their texts things of how you should live your life. For instance, the Golden Rule, like one of the most revolutionary ethics statements from Christianity. But also our modern secular society is the one that's facilitating this change in ethics. The reason why we don't stone apostates and we don't stone people who are divorced anymore, or that we don't kill witches or atheists, right, is because our secular society is influencing the religious Christianity to pick and choose, to cherry pick the parts of the religious text that fit with our modern ethical values. Does that follow?
I like W.H. Auden, the brilliant humanist author who was an atheist, went into a movie theater in New York City to watch a movie of Nazi Germans taking Poland. And in that movie theater in New York City, Germans hopped up out of their seats saying, "Kill the Pole! Kill the Pole!" W.H. Auden had an incredibly naively optimistic view of human nature. He watched incredible hatred in German Americans towards Poles as put on that movie screen in Manhattan. He goes out of that movie theater realizing evil is real. My atheism is bankrupt. Because atheism gives no basis for evil being real. It's not real, it just is. And W.H. Auden comes to faith in Christ because he begins to grapple with ethics. Real right, real wrong, real justice, real injustice.